My lords, I'm rising today to pay tribute to the noble Earl, the Earl of Longford, and the noble Lord, Lord Hailsham of St. Marylebone. Two great men, both distinguished members of this house, both full of many happy and fulfilling years. The two knew each other well. They were both born at the beginning of the last century. They were both men of first-rate intellect, both educated at Oxford and offered positions by that university. Curiously, the two even contested between them the seat of Oxford City in 1945, a contest which Lord Hailsham won. Although there were many parallels in their lives, the two men were in fact remarkably dissimilar. I shall speak about Lord Hailsham shortly, but begin, if I may, with just a few words about Lord Longford. Frank was a very familiar figure here, known to all of us and admired by many. He was, of course, a distinguished leader of this house, and it is with a sense of gratitude for a long life, lived to the full, that I pay tribute to him today. He was born as Frank Pakenham in County Westmeath in the centre of Ireland. He was educated at Eton and New College, Oxford, where he took a first in 1927. He began his political career by working at the Conservative Research Department. He changed allegiance to the Labour Party and for the next 65 years never wavered. Plainly, my lords, he believed in the power of redemption through good works. One of the most important events in his life was his conversion to Roman Catholicism, and throughout his life, plainly, his faith sustained and supported him and gave him a sense of moral and religious certainty. From 1941 to 1944, he worked with Sir William Beveridge, and with him drew up the blueprint for the foundation of the post-war welfare state. He began in this house as a whip, soon became Under Secretary of State at the War Office with special responsibility for Germany. His approach was typical and controversial. He was ready to forgive the German people more quickly than many others. He worked tirelessly to stop starvation in Germany, focusing on the reopening of schools and hospitals and on currency reform. That approach did not necessarily make him universally popular at home, but looking back, it may be that that period of his life was his finest hour. He moved later to the Ministry of Aviation, and then in 1951 became First Lord of the Admiralty. In 1955 he founded New Bridge, the first organisation dedicated to the welfare of ex-prisoners. Harold Wilson appointed him chairman of a special committee to investigate penal reform in 1963, and that report, Crime, a Challenge, advocated the abolition of capital punishment, aftercare for prisoners, and the introduction of the parole system. And I think we will remember him most clearly for his contributions on those subjects. His ministerial career reached its climax as he was appointed to the cabinet as Lord Privy Seal and leader of this house in 1964. He stayed in the cabinet for 4 years, but then resigned on principle when the cabinet abandoned a commitment to raising the school leaving age. I personally still remember with admiration and recall that the days were not long past when a senior politician could resign over a question of deep principle. Thereafter, he campaigned and published. His most publicised campaign was for the release of the Moor's murderer, Myra Hindley. It is fair to observe that his point of view on that matter was not popular. It was an article of faith for Frank to condemn the offence but care for the offender. He became a tireless prison visitor, visiting anyone he came to hear of who seemed to need help or support. He was a prolific author whose books commanded admiration and respect. As chance would have it, I read his obituaries. Far away from this house, the Daily Telegraph listed his books in order of publication. One that caught my eye was A History of the House of Lords. The next in order was Years of Struggle, Years of Hope. I think somewhere Frank may be smiling at that felicitous conjunction. He was a man of principle. I did not always agree with him. I don't think he ever agreed with me. But we all respected the way that he followed conscience, whatever the issue and whatever the cost. He did sometimes look absent-minded and dishevelled, but beware, as we all discovered on the government front bench, that masked a clear, accurate and witty mind. He was 56 years a member of this House, and so no wonder it is very strange not to see him here today. I know that the whole House will wish me to express to his family not only our sincere condolences, but our affection, respect and admiration for this grand old man of politics.
Yeah. My lords, I too would like to join the noble and learned lord, the leader of the House, in paying tribute to the noble Lords Lord Longford and Lord Hailsham. I would, like him, would like to begin in particular to pay tribute to Lord Longford, who was one of the most interesting characters to sit in this House, and perhaps about whom one of the very few people one could genuinely say that he became one of the fixtures and fittings of this House. He was with us for an age far beyond that allotted to most. As the noble and learned lord has said, he was over 55 years in this place, and to the end he spoke out for what he believed. My lords, also interestingly, he acquired a medley of peerages that I suspect will render him forever unique in Labour Party circles: an hereditary peerage of first creation in 1945, an earldom in the peerage of Ireland in 1961, an inherited UK barony in the same year, and then a life peerage in 1999. Not bad at all, my lords. And it was a collection he was openly proud of. I don't suppose he'd have ever been described as a people's peer, but perhaps he should have been. For wherever there was suffering, whether in the form of poverty or of, as he saw it, unjust imprisonment, there he was on the side of people who could not speak for themselves or for whom others did not care to speak. And this flowed from that powerful Catholic faith that informed his entire career and which made him, I suspect, not always the most comfortable of colleagues in either cabinet or parliament. He was not one to compromise the diktat of conscience, even in the face of scorn and hostility from parts of the media. My lords, he was a cabinet minister over 50 years ago, before some of us were born. He led this House in the 1960s, but he was someone who, throughout that long career of public service, always loved this place and loved it with deep emotion and passion. My lords, so I join the leader wholeheartedly in expressing our sympathy to his family and friends. As the noble and learned lord just said, he began life as a Conservative, and someone booed in 1932 when we lost him to the Labour Party. But his sense of social justice was respected in every part of this House, and it is by standing for that sense of natural justice in the future that this House will best honour his memory.
Yeah.
My lords, may I too add the voices of these benches to the tribute paid to the noble Lord Longford, and also to the noble Lord Hailsham, about whom we'll be speaking shortly. But let me say that the good fairy obviously gave to both these distinguished men an astonishing array of gifts, in particular a remarkable intelligence, a deep sense of humanity, a very strong sense of integrity, a profound religious faith. Lord Longford, one recalls, was of course part of the Attlee government and subsequently of the Wilson government, and served them both in senior capacities. As a young man, he'd been a politics lecturer at Christ Church, and in that again shared a link with Lord Hailsham, a link to that famous Oxford College, as both had been educated at Eton. I agree with the leader of the House that perhaps the single most distinguished period of Lord Longford's life was his period as Lord Privy Seal when he was in charge of occupied Germany. He brought to occupied Germany an astonishing sense of compassion and empathy, and I for one would believe that one of the reasons that Germany has been one of the great successes of the post-war world, a truly powerful and strong democracy, is because they were taught by Lord Longford a different way than that of violence and war. Lord Longford then went on, as has been said, to become Lord Privy Seal, and in that capacity, as the leader of the House has said, resigned over the issue of the raising of the school leaving age, something that for me, at that time a junior minister at education, profoundly met my own sense of sadness at the decision by the then government to delay that school leaving raising age. He then went on, as we all know, to having left the House of Lords and politics, to become chairman of the National Bank, which was effectively the National Bank of Ireland, and subsequently in this House played a very large part in two areas, both of them open to derision and criticism. One of them was prison reform, with which he was very closely identified, often in its least popular aspects. The second, of course, was pornography, on which he wrote a distinguished report, which immediately turned him into a cartoon figure for virtually every one of the tabloids. The remarkable thing about Lord Longford, whose family was a friend of my family all my life long, was that criticism and derision, simply as the noble Lord Strathclyde pointed out, slid off his back like water off a duck. He paid not the slightest attention to it. If he believed what he was doing was right, then the press could go and create whatever cacophony they liked. Frank was undisturbed and in no way impeded. Let me finally say this of him. Some people called him a fool. If so, like Dostoevsky, he was a holy fool. He brought to this house an astonishing sense of spiritual mission, an astonishing belief in the infinite potential of every human being. And he was one of the luminaries of this house. And now that the light has gone out, I think many of us recognise what the house owes him and will not forget his passing.
Half of all noble lords on these benches and myself, I should like to add our support to the tributes which have been so eloquently made from the party benches. All noble lords here today will have their own special memories of the noble Lord Longford. My own admiration was for his eloquence and his determination to support those causes dear to his heart. He was very much his own man. He combined in equal measure his championship for the less well-respected members of society with an unquenchable patrician air as a member of a very distinguished and noble family. We shall all miss his contributions and his unfailing memory of the business of this house, which for him stretched back for over half a century.
My lords, from these benches we salute a life that was devoted to the service of Christian truth and of humanity. The obituaries have recorded Lord Longford's double conversion to the Labour Party and to Roman Catholicism. A far deeper significance was his profound conversion to God and to the Lord Jesus Christ. Our concern today is not with his private life, though one may point to the witness of a marriage of nearly 70 years and to his evident capacity to win devoted friends. But of his public life, one must say this, that in everything Frank Longford said and did, he sought to bear witness to the truths and claims of the gospel. He was passionate, he was fearless, he was of the stuff of which martyrs are made. My lords, may I once again mention two instances of the way in which, in the face of prevailing opinion, he sought to follow the moral claims of his faith. The first was soon after the Second World War, as the minister responsible for Germany, when he set his face against the punitive attitude towards the Germans which still prevailed and instituted policies for social, economic and political reconstruction. It is said that Konrad Adenauer counted him as one of the founders of the Federal Republic. In retrospect, we can see that this policy was not only moral, it was also politically right. Secondly, there was his care for prisoners and for the victims of injustice. His concern was not merely theoretical, it was practical. Few of us can have agreed with him in every cause that he espoused, but we all admired him. That is because he was no mere moral campaigner. I am much happier, he once said, taking up the cudgels on behalf of the stricken. In the end, I feel that my vocation lies there rather than in the denunciation of evil. Such is the memory of the man to whom today we pay tribute and for whom today we thank God.
My lords, may I now say a few words about Lord Hailsham of St Marylebone. He was born in 1907, educated at Eton, where an exceptional intellect was quickly recognised. He took a double first at Oxford and was immediately successful in obtaining the fellowship much prized at All Souls. In 1932, he was called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn. By that time, his father had been awarded an hereditary peerage and had served for 3 years at Lord Chancellor. By all accounts, Quintin Hogg received the news of his father's hereditary peerage with some dismay. Even at that early stage, he harboured ambitions of going into politics. In those days, there was no way of disclaiming a peerage, so his father's acceptance of the honour condemned him to sitting on a red bench rather than the green one, something which he deeply regretted at that stage. However, so long as the unwelcome peerage was held by his father, he was eligible to stand for the House of Commons, and in 1938, as is well known, he won the Oxford City by-election. Having won the seat, so he began his political career. But only a year later, war broke out, he joined the army, was commissioned into the Rifle Brigade, served in the Middle East, was wounded, and in 1942 invalided out. He went back to the Commons. He formed, with others, the Tory Reform Committee. He was instrumental in urging the coalition government to accept the Beveridge report on social security, that very report which Lord Longford had worked so hard to produce. In 1945, he became Joint Under-Secretary of State for Hare. He was obliged to leave the Commons in 1950 when his father died. He took silk in 1953, but even then, I think it is fair to say, his heart was really with politics rather than with the law, and he continued actively in Parliament. He became a Privy Councillor in 1956, and in the same year was made First Lord of the Admiralty, 5 years after Frank Longford had held the same post. He had a succession of ministerial posts in the Macmillan administration, and of course he was a distinguished leader of this House from 1957 to 1963. All that came to an end when Mr. Macmillan became ill in 1963. Viscount Hailsham became the first Conservative peer to take advantage of the provision in the Life Peerages Act, which allowed an hereditary peer to disclaim his peerage. He did so. He threw his hat into the ring with vim and vigour. He was a serious contender. He had captured the imagination, more important, the affection of the public when he was Conservative Party chairman, when he had campaigned in the 1959 election by tolling a handbell for the death of the Labour Party. An interesting, if somewhat over-hopeful, suggestion. Such dramatic stunts were very much a part of the person, in exactly the same way as perhaps coincidentally and bizarrely was that extraordinary, powerful intellect. He was a humorous and mercurial man, and in the end, his party preferred another. That was a disappointment, but he was soon back in the House of Commons, representing St Marylebone. He served very loyally in a variety of ministerial roles until 1970, when he came back to this House, this time with a life peerage, so his collection was not as extensive as that recited by Lord Strathclyde in the Earl of Longford's case, but still interesting. And he came back here as Lord Chancellor. It is in that role that he will be mainly remembered. He was fiercely proud and defensive of the independence of the judiciary. He saw through the implementation of the Beeching proposals for the reform of the criminal courts. Even as Lord Chancellor, perhaps, his main focus was politics rather than the law. He was a member of Mr. Heath's cabinet and of Mrs. Thatcher's cabinet. He was forthright, respected, and entertaining. His skills as an orator were second to none. He could argue a case with eloquence and charm, so that sometimes people actually changed their minds. A distinct shock to the nervous and political system, as your lordships well know. He was one of the outstanding characters of 20th century politics. He had a truly impish sense of humour. He could be impatient when those around him could not keep up to his intellectual pace. His sense of morality and public service seemed to belong to an older school, which curiously made his contribution in this house all the more necessary and all the more valuable. He was frailer in these later years and less often about this house, but we remember him as a man of energy, vigour and drive who served his country throughout his whole life with integrity and enjoyment, and we shall miss him for many years to come. I have, of course, written on behalf of all of us to the noble Baroness Hogg, who I'm most pleased to see in her place, and on all our behalf, I would send our condolences and our affection and our remembrance through her to his family.
My lords, Lord Hailsham was one of the giants of British politics and the English legal system in the latter part of the 20th century. His succession of high offices in the service of both country and party, including leadership of this House, culminated in 12 years as a distinguished Lord Chancellor, a term of office unequalled in modern times. As Lord Chancellor, he was a powerful defender of the independence of the legal system. He also sat relatively frequently in judgment, taking as active a part as the modern role of Lord Chancellor allows. But it was his wise political judgment that was respected by Prime Ministers as diverse as Harold Macmillan, Edward Heath, and Margaret Thatcher. He was striking proof of the way the office of Lord Chancellor can benefit politics, Parliament, and the law alike. My lords, his long career would mark him out as a remarkable figure in any age. So too would his acute mind, as the noble and learned Lord the Leader of the House reminded us, which was marked by a fellowship of All Souls and a range of notable publications over nearly 60 years in the fields of law, politics, and the Constitution, and also, my lords, on spiritual matters. For he was a man whose firm Christian faith and abiding integrity were lodestars of his career. But, my lords, for those of us who were privileged to have known him and to have watched him at work, there was something far more than the records of a great life of public service that will be written forever in the history books. It was the presence of a character as unique as any in modern politics, the twinkle in the eye, the flash of humour, followed invariably by that throaty chuckle that showed him unable to contain his delight in his own wit. A commanding, resonant oratory that now seems something of another era, and a personal kindness and a moral and physical courage that were two striking sides of his nature. My lords, who can forget his whispered asides from the woolsack? His taking out his walking stick to batter a poster of Harold Wilson, or his arrival at number 10 to accept office under Margaret Thatcher on a bicycle. He was a figure both lovable and loved. My lords, the dramatic renunciation of his peerage and his failure to secure the leadership of the Conservative Party that almost everyone thought was his for the taking could have been the defining moment of his career. It could have led to bitterness and to the renunciation of public life, but not in his case. Unlike others, he readily took office under the leader who had defeated him. He was too big a man to do otherwise in his public duty. He was a great parliamentarian, my lords, as well as a great public servant, and he has left us with a lasting phrase of warning, the elective dictatorship that we must bear in mind whenever the independence of Parliament is threatened by change. My lords, our heartfelt sympathy and good wishes go to his family at this time. They can be reassured by the memory of a great life, nobly lived, by a member of a family steeped in public service over many generations and which is still living out those ideals. And they must know, my lords, that so long as the Hailsham title lives, it will be indelibly associated with the memory of this extraordinary and gifted man.
My lords, among the many talents that were showered upon Lord Hailsham, high intelligence, wit, ebullience, a tremendously energetic personality, there was a secret ingredient. Like Winston Churchill, he had an American mother. There was also two talents that were left out, talents indispensable to political advancement. The first of those was caution, and the second was dullness. Lacking those two, it is perhaps not altogether surprising that a man of such abounding talent did not become Prime Minister as he long wished to be. Lord Hailsham was, as we know, somebody who embarked with enthusiasm in politics. He began by getting it wrong, because, of course, he was the pro-Chamberlain candidate in that famous 1938 Oxford by-election. But being a man of ebullience, and also a man with a capacity for learning and learning quickly, he came back from that rather unfortunate experience and indeed served with great distinction in Her Majesty's forces, and after the war played a very large part in politics. I would like, if I may, just to underline two or three other characteristics of his political career. One of them was that, rather like Lord Longford, of whom we spoke before, he had to his credit an astonishing achievement in the area of education, for he was twice Secretary of State for Education. Many people forget that he was the great champion of the Robbins Report, the report that enabled a much larger proportion of the British population to move on to higher education than had ever been the case before. And I think we all owe Lord Hailsham one of the planks of our democracy, the widening of opportunities to a larger and larger range of our fellow citizens. The second thing I want to say about Lord Hailsham was that in his long and distinguished career as Lord Chancellor, where indeed, as the previous tributes have indicated, he was a powerful champion of the independence of the judiciary, and indeed also a very strong champion of the rights of individuals, marked time and again by his complete opposition to any attempt to water those down. People may forget that in 1973, when the IRA made its attack on Old Bailey, Lord Hailsham decided as Lord Chancellor that it was his duty to go down and visit the ruined courts of law. He, however, decided that his official car would be an inappropriate thing to take because it would disturb the work of the police. So he got on that famous and capricious vehicle known as a bicycle and bicycled down to the Old Bailey, wearing as ever his bowler and his pin-striped trousers in order to give comfort and assistance to the fellow members of the bar and the other members of his profession. I very strongly agree with what the noble Lord Strathclyde has said in his long and remarkable history of writing very thoughtful books, including, of course, a very distinguished book on the laws of England. He did warn time and again about the dangers that were inherent in modern democracies, and in particular the dangers of an unrestrained executive power. In this, I believe, he showed considerable foresight, because all of us are conscious that the executive has more power under all governments today than it used to do in the past. Let me conclude what I have to say about Lord Hailsham by quoting his own remarks when he was asked why he chose to bicycle down to the Old Bailey. He said, and I'm sure that there are members of this House who will see the pertinence of my quotation, "It does no damage for a Lord Chancellor to appear a little ridiculous from time to time, as long as it is not all the time." Nothing that quenched the ebullient wit of the noble Lord Hailsham. Time and again it broke through what might be thought to be the wiser course, because he simply could not bear not to give vent to his spirit. And I remember, all of us will remember, the occasion when he invited the tabloid press to come and watch him walk into the sea at the Conservative Party conference, incidentally a very cold sea, wearing unbelievably old-fashioned swimming trunks, which one and the same time told us what a brave man he was, but how in some ways he was rather out of touch with fashion. Finally, as of Lord Longford, let me just mention the two great pillars in the life of Lord Hailsham. One, as the leader of the House has said, was his profound religious faith. I think sometimes he had a kind of dialogue with the Almighty in which it was not clear whether they were speaking as equals or not, but certainly something very close to that. In the case of Lord Longford, the approach was, I think, perhaps rather more humble. But both men also were borne up by extraordinary and astonishing marriages. As the noble prelate said, long marriages with women of great character and strength and courage. Both in the case of Lord Hailsham, he was devastated, as we all know, by the death of his second wife, after a long marriage in a tragic riding accident. But fortunately found happiness in his last years with his third wife, the late Lady Hailsham. So let us say that these two institutions, religion and marriage, were crucial parts of the greatness of these two men, brought to them an astonishing degree of persistence and determination. And let us again thank God that we have had the experience of having such distinguished people in our current house.
I'm privileged to express our condolences to the noble Baroness and to members of Lord Hailsham's family on this occasion. I won't repeat the catalogue of his formidable achievements so fully and eloquently expressed by others. My memories of him are rather more personal. He was Lord Chancellor when I was first chosen Speaker in 1983. And thereafter, we travelled together to numerous Commonwealth parliamentary conferences and to meetings of the European Economic Community, as it was then called. At the time, he was a widower, and my wife became his unofficial minder to ensure that he was on time and dressed in the correct garb. It was a formidable task, but also great fun. I shall never forget, none of us who were present in Athens for a European Economic Community conference will ever forget the after-dinner speech he made on that occasion in Greek. Unfortunately, it was ancient Greek. Nobody understood a word, but it deservedly achieved a standing ovation. My lords, he was indeed a legend in his lifetime, whose service was very distinguished both in war and in peace, serving 7 prime ministers in a number of distinguished ministerial offices, and, as already been mentioned, the longest-serving Lord Chancellor. Just before the recess, I ran into his son, Douglas, member of the other place, and said, "How is your father?" To which he said, "Gone, I'm afraid." My lords, I fear that Quinton's last days were not happy ones for him or for his family. And as I've mentioned, our hearts go out to them today. Gone, my lords, certainly, but always remembered by those who were privileged to know him with great affection and great esteem.
My lords, can I add the tribute of these benches to what has already been very eloquently said about the life and career of Lord Hailsham, and offer our own condolences to the noble Baroness. He was also a person who gave enormous service, as had many members of his family, to London. And I remember also his enormous contributions to many institutions within London. He said on one occasion that every politician, no matter how devoted, and we've heard, my lords, of his extraordinary parliamentary service and his extraordinary loyalty to the traditions of Parliament, but he said that every politician worth his salt must have interests outside politics. The more intelligent of my friends, for them it's religion. For the less intelligent, it tends to be hunting. But as a very strenuous intellectual, we also remember, as we recall the memory of Lord Longford, his conversion to Christianity and his life as a reader in the Church of England. And we acknowledge and are grateful for his insistence as a great parliamentarian that wherever the Church of England might be, it is a church of apostolic foundation and certainly not merely a creature of Parliament. And it was good to have the great parliamentarian underlining that fact. That's not to say that he wasn't occasionally rather critical of bishops. And I remember him myself saying the trouble with bishops is that they tend to blow in, blow off, and blow out. But nevertheless, despite this occasional asperity, like other noble lords, we remember a parliamentarian of dignity and magnanimity and greatness of soul. And I have no doubt that the trumpets, or probably in his case the bells as well, are ringing for him on the other side.
My lords, I hesitate to delay the House, but even as a mere adjunct of the Hogg family, I must express appreciation of what has been said this afternoon, and also the regrets of my husband Douglas, who could not be here to take his place at the bar of the House to hear what your lordships have said. He is detained not by business in another place, but by something I know his father would consider equally important, representing his client's interests in court. However, I'm very happy that so many of Lord Hailsham's family, who looked after him so devotedly in his declining years, were here in the gallery able to hear what your lordships have to say. And might I perhaps, with the indulgence of the House, just end with a brief quotation from Lord Hailsham's last great book, A Sparrow's Flight, which seemed to me tremendously appropriate to the dangerous and difficult times in which we live at the moment. He wrote, "Despite all the destruction and malevolence of the world, I do not believe in a malevolent deity or an irrational universe. I believe in goodness, truthfulness, loving kindness, beauty, generosity, and loyalty. They all exist and are qualities which demand just as much explanation as malevolence, mendaciousness, cruelty, ugliness, meanness, and treachery. As the considered judgment of a brilliant but not over-optimistic man, I think we perhaps can take some comfort from that."
My lords,
I would like to associate myself very strongly with all that has been said. As your lordships know, I had the great honour of succeeding Lord Hailsham after the sadly short period in which Lord Havers was Lord Chancellor, and I just wish to pay public testimony, since I have the opportunity to do so, to the warm and affectionate support he gave to my wife and myself during my term of office. He didn't always agree with what I was doing, as some of your lordships may remember. He had views as to where the ideas were coming from, which part of one's anatomy. But notwithstanding that, he was a firm and affectionate friend, and warm communication of affection has continued to very near the end of his life. We had the privilege of having him with us in Edinburgh in our home on one occasion, and our children have never experienced such an erudite conversation at breakfast.
My lords, I hope I may pay tribute to, as we speak of these two great men, to the continuing work of the noble Earl Lord Longford. Many years ago, he established the New Horizons Youth Centre in King's Cross, and that continues today to provide help for the homeless people in that area, including the young prostitutes working in King's Cross, young men coming out of prison. All the sorts of people that he used to help continue to be helped thanks to his foundation of this centre.
The Lord Morris of Manchester.
My lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.